Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-Commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. We are going to be talking to two experts in the B2B space around a topic that we have never covered on the podcast before, but is something that is absolutely near and dear to my heart. So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Saumya Goel and Alexandra Olsson from Rhyme. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having us. Happy to be here.
It's awesome to have you guys along for the ride today. I get two for the price of one. I get both of you on the call with me today. So that usually with my interviews, they're usually solo interviews, and I don't get the pleasure of having two people on the pod at the same time. It's very rare. So I appreciate you carving out some time to chat to me today. It's going to be great.
Sounds good.
Now, where you guys specialize is you guys have this amazing, I hesitate to call it an agency. I would call it more like a boutique. And you own a company together called Rhymecommerce. You're partners in Rhymecommerce. And where you guys specialize is B2B UI and UX. Now, where this, I guess, when you first reached out to me, one of the things that struck me is that I've been working in the B2B space for a very long time now. But one of the massive differentiating factors between the B2B e-commerce world and the B2C and D2C e-commerce world are that in the B2C and D2C world, UI UX kind of reigns supreme. Most of the projects that I have worked on historically, I've been doing this for 24 years, most of the projects that I've ever worked on in the B2C and D2C world, the UI and the UX were the focus. So basically the UI and UX were in service of the functionality. They were in service, or the functionality was in service of the UI UX. They were in service of the experience that you were trying to create for the customer. They were in service of the feeling, of the emotion that you were trying to evoke, the brand positioning, the whole entire experience you have with that brand at every single digital touch point. That is such a big deal in the B2C and D2C world, almost to the point of exclusion of other things. So I like to say that in the B2C and D2C world, it's form over function every single time. In the B2B world, it's usually function over form every single time. And I don't think they should be mutually exclusive. And it seems to me that you guys have created Rhyme because you don't think they should be mutually exclusive either, right?
Yes, exactly.
And what drew you guys even into this space to begin with? Because this is not a space that most creatives go into, because they realize that it's a bit of an uphill slog to get B2B brands to realize the benefit of cutting edge UX. And then we also have a scenario where a lot of the B2B e-commerce platforms out there aren't necessarily as flexible from a UI UX perspective out of the box as your popular B2C, D2C platforms like your Shopify's of the world. So it feels like you have the world against you in some respects, but on the flip side of that, because of that, I have never met anybody else in this industry who specializes in B2B UI UX. It feels like very much a blue ocean space for you guys.
Yes, exactly. We actually got into this space because we used to design templates. So design storefront templates for a leading e-commerce technology provider. And we realized that while we were designing the B2C store templates, the buyer journey was more or less. So the B2C journeys look almost the same across the board, and they are more emotional journeys and very easy to think through. But when it came to the B2B buyer experiences, we realized there's so much complexity. Each business has its own processes, has its own buyer needs, and all of that has to be translated onto a web page. So it's taking a three-dimensional experience and translating it into a two-dimensional experience. And we realized how much power UX and UI has in the B2B e-commerce space to drive business impact, because all these complex processes need to be translated into these web pages. And it requires expertise. This is a technical skill. So it's based on psychology, it's based on science, how do we design these buyer experiences and they can actually drive considerable business.
Yeah, I also think
else? Yeah.
it's
Go
really
ahead.
interesting to think about the technical feasibility. As you mentioned, it's more straightforward in B2C, but in B2B, we have these specific cases, and it also gives a lot of opportunity to optimize the user experience there. We don't need to settle for something that is out of the box. We can still honor the user. We can still make human experiences. And it's actually, if you see it on the other way around, it's an extreme like opportunity space here where we can optimize these experiences for B2B. They don't need to be completely vastly opposite of B2C.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point, which is that in the B2C and D2C world, oftentimes the brief, and look, because I've been working in this space for so long, oftentimes the brief is, we want to be aspirational, we want to be inspirational, we want to be fun, we want to be sexy, we want to be whatever, right? We want to be simple, we want to be like the Apple website, we want to be clean, we want to have reduced friction, we want to create these amazing bundle experiences so that we can easily cross-sell and upsell and make sure that the attributes are really visible of our products and all this sort of stuff. So it's very, for lack of a better term, touchy-feely, right? Yeah. The whole idea behind this, almost all B2C and D2C purchases, they're discretionary purchases, right? People very rarely must make that purchase as part of their day, right? They're doing it because they want to, not because they have to. And as a result of that, there's a whole different psychology, and especially at different positions in the funnel when you're trying to create that experience, and depending on your target avatar and what triggers them to make a purchase psychologically, whether it's standing in the community or whatever it might be, the set of psychological triggers and the goal behind the UI UX is wildly different in typically, not always, but typically in the B2C world versus the B2B world. And in the B2B world, because our buyers, they are doing this as a job. They're not coming to your website to be inspired. They're not coming to your website to be wowed. They're coming to your website because they need to make a purchase through you as part of their day job. The faster they can do that, the more conveniently they can do that, the more seamlessly they can do that, with less friction, with all the digital services wrapped around that other than the transactional element, the better their experience is. But to your point, I think there are so many use cases that we have to cater for in terms of a digital services layer that we do not have. We could have 20 pumps, for example, that look on the surface exactly the same, but their specifications and their capabilities and their technical attributes and those things can be wildly different. And so therefore, even merchandising in the B2B world is exponentially more difficult than it is in the B2C and D2C world. So is this something that you recognized? You said, wow, okay, the buyer psychology here is so different because they have to complete this transaction. They do not have a choice, right?
Yes, and it's also, so we have to look at the B2C world as we look at it, maybe impulsive buying decisions. Our order values are also maybe considerably lower than in the B2B world. The decisions in the B2B world are more thought out, and they're longer term. It's not that one will just make their transaction be on their way. This is a long relationship with this buyer. And that's where, it's very important that we prioritize the buyer's needs during their online shopping experience, make sure that they have all the tools and all the information that they need to make that purchase decision. And buyers are ready to spend. We've seen in some reports that over 75% of B2B decision makers are ready to spend over $500,000 on a single B2B transaction. And that is why we need to prioritize how they're experiencing that online shop.
And that raises a very good point, because in the B2B world, we're not servicing a customer, we're servicing an account.
Yes.
And this is a very different, when we go out and we win a customer in the B2C, D2C world, we're trying to upsell them, cross-sell them, we're trying to remarket to them, we're them to come back to our website and buy again, and basically amortizing our CAC costs over 2, 3, 4 purchases, et cetera, maximize AOVs, maximize LTVs, et cetera. High AOVs and LTVs generally are part and parcel of the B2B world. So we're not, it's not like we're necessarily trying to artificially drive high AOVs and high LTVs. They are native to the B2B world as a general rule. And as a result of that, how we treat an account becomes more important, meaning all the buyers within that account, all the locations within that account, making sure that we're creating shared shopping lists and permission sets for the buyers and automatic escalations and automatic approval flows and presenting MOQs. And there's just so many things that we have to manage at both the account level, but also the individual buyer level within the B2B world. It's a totally different mindset in terms of who our customer is. The account is our customer. It's not just the buyer. And this it has a massive impact on the type of experiences we're trying to create, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say it's really interesting to differentiate from the buyer and also the admin kind of user, because they will have vastly different experiences interacting with this B2B e-commerce platform. So if we look at the buyer experience, they are not going to be looking for the same things as a B2C buyer. They are not going to be browsing as much, but they're going to be searching, which really emphasizes we need to have our product data in a way that you can filter, you can search. And this is a huge difficulty for many B2B companies where the product data is key to having this search experience on point and create a good user experience. But then again, we also need to look at the more administrative facts of things. We need to be able to go on there and look at what are our user permissions, who can do what are approval flows. So the complexity is actually larger on the B2B side than on the B2C. It's really important that we do not oversee the user experience because it's actually even more so needed because we have more users on the same account in this case.
And I guess more touch points, right? Because even if a B2B buyer is making their purchase via EDI, or even if they're making their purchase via punch-out or e-procurement system, basically their system talking to my system behind the scenes, placing the orders based on a PO, whatever, to where they're not necessarily using our e-commerce, self-service e-commerce function, there's a whole ton of other digital services that are required in the B2B world that they would like to be able to go to a portal. And they don't even, most of the B2B brands I consult to, they don't even use the term e-commerce. They don't, that's not a term that is commonly utilized, even for a self-service e-commerce experience. That's not the language they use. They use terms like a buyer portal, right? They use terms like an account management portal. They use things like a online catalog system. They use completely different terminology to the brands that work in the B2C and D2C world. And therefore, even from a terminology perspective, if I'm going in and I'm consulting to them and I'm using all this B2C and D2C terminology, they're going to go, you don't even bloody understand what we do. You don't really understand this whole B2B thing, do you? And so to your point, when I've gone in and I've helped brands start their adoption planning before we even get into scoping, and I'm helping them run customer interviews about what e-commerce means to them. How what do they consider e-commerce? Are they even interested in e-commerce? 9 times out of 10, even for the customers and the buyers that aren't interested in e-commerce, but when you recontextualize that and you ask them other questions, oh, would you like to be able to log in and see what we carry? Would you like to log in and see how much inventory we hold? Would you like to log in and see your price for this specific SKU? Would you like to log in and lodge a quote request? Would you like to log in and electronically lodge return authorizations? Would you like to log in and track your order? Even if you place the order via EDI, would you like a portal where you could log in and you could track that shipment all the way from the time it leaves our warehouse to the time it hits you? Would you like to be able to set up your shipping rules and FOB rules and LTL rules and all these different things? When you ask it in that way, they go, oh, yeah, we don't really want e-commerce, but we'd love all those other services, which through my lens, those are still digital commerce services. They might not be the buy now button, but it's an entire digital suite of digital commerce services that will make this customer's experience with you better if you cater for it and if you care about the experience they have across all those other touch points, right?
Exactly. Something we like to say is your e-commerce store or your online service is like your 24/7 salesperson. So the same care and effort you put into your sales experience, your in-person sales experience, your in-person account management experience, that same effort is what's required on any online digital service. And when we're building an e-commerce platform or any sort of online digital offering, we are building a technology service. And so building a technology service is a totally different, animal than in person or anything else. So we have companies like Amazon that literally hire thousands of people to run this technology service. So we want to help brands understand that what they're offering, this is a new service, and it requires the appropriate teams, which includes your engineers, your developers, and your UX, UI stakeholders. And it can't just be something that you hand over to your marketing department and hope that they have the expertise of building this massive technology offering.
In my experience, many B2B brands don't have a marketing team at all. So they have a sales team. They might have field sales. They might have a significant percentage of their staff might be salespeople. A significant portion of their staff might be customer service and success people, but they don't have necessarily a marketing team, or they may have one person in marketing that really acts in service of sales.
Yes.
And so that is also another key difference, is the stakeholders that you guys, for example, engage with, I would assume, are very different oftentimes than the stakeholders you're engaging with on the B2C side of the fence, right? The reality is you're dealing with the business systems and IT people, because of course then a lot of the data that you guys would expect to be able to expose on the front end has to come from ERPs, it has to come from PIM systems, it has to come from data aggregators, and it has to all be integrated. And there's so much, there are so many components of the UI layer that you don't have direct control over and are part of other business processes that have to happen behind the scenes to be able to create that great experience on the front end. In the B2C and D2C world, a lot of that data is reasonably centralized and reasonably self-contained in the e-commerce platform, even if it originates from a PLM or a PIM or an ERP. Oftentimes it's centralized, and we don't necessarily have to pull a lot of data in real time from back office systems to create a great front-end experience. In the B2B world, that's not true. Usually we have to query inventory levels of multi-location warehousing and all these. There's a million different things that we have to think of either in real time or very close to real time in the B2B world that we do not think about in the B2C and D2C world. And when you guys first started to look at this, you were obviously building themes and templates that were default, standard, out-of-the-box themes for some of these e-commerce platform vendors. But what I often find is that the vendors themselves and even the B2B customers will often think that's good enough. We don't really need to customize this. As long as the functionality is there, as long as the data is shown on the front end, we don't really need to tweak this beyond the defaults, right? But it breaks my heart when I hear people say that, only because I spent the vast majority of my early career working in the B2C and D2C world, and now that I'm in the B2B world, I'm like, oh my God, there are so many opportunities to make this better. Was that the aha moment? Was that the light bulb moment for you both, where you went, shit, this just does not get the love? And to be fair, I think part of it is that the B2B world is so male dominated, and they're so focused on the functionality and the integrations and the data and the sales process and get the revenue in. And it's a blind spot, not for all males, but I think for many males, this is a blind spot that we have. We're so focused on the tech, we're so focused on the shiny functionality that kind of the user experience can often be an afterthought. And I think that's a blind spot. Is that a blind spot you recognized?
Absolutely. And I also think one interesting fact about design is it's often looked at as the UI portion of it. You look at the fonts, the colors, and you think that's design. And that is easily overlooked. But when you look at the UX portion, it's so much more than that. It's making human experiences. It's making the interaction with technology pleasant. You want to give back that quality that your brand is giving. You want to give good user experiences. And that is building your customer relationships in a way that they want to come back to your store. They are not going to be looking for other competitors because they're wanted and they want to come back for it.
I think the key thing to understand is that UX and UI is a technical skill. It is akin to accounting or engineering. It is based on research, psychology, and science. So it's not a matter of personal taste. And that's where I think people lose the plot, because maybe one person in your company, two people put this store together, they may love it, but that doesn't speak to the majority of buyers. So with UX UI, with best practices in UX UI, with all of our research, we know what the majority of buyers like to see and how they like to experience. So we design according to that. We're not designing for personal taste. And we actually had a funny interaction like very recently where we had approached a individual who works on a B2B e-commerce store and mentioned that we can help them with design. And that individual was very, I guess, offended, that, oh, but my store is amazing. And it was a matter of personal taste, but we could point out like, hey, your font sizes are pretty small. Like it affects readability. A buyer will not be able to read your filters. You need to increase the font size. So these are all science-based insights that someone who doesn't have the training would not know.
And I think also the buying cohort is changing, and therefore their expectations are changing. A recent study by DC360 showed that like 61% of B2B buyers are now millennials. So we're talking well over half now are millennials. So we don't just have a bunch of old white dudes making purchases through a B2B website anymore, and then their account manager takes them out to the ball game or schmoozes with them or takes them out for beers on a Friday night, whatever. The whole entire buying demographic is evolving. And where it historically maybe skewed much older and much more male, now it's skewing much younger, and there's an equal number of females in the purchasing function and the buying function of these organizations as there are men. And as a result of that, if we continue to do things the way we've always done them, because we don't realize that our buyer avatar, we don't even realize that they've changed. If we don't recognize that and cater to the next generation of buyer, then our competitors who do will eat our lunch. And this is something I think that a lot of B2B brands, they don't realize their buyer is actually evolving. And therefore, the buyer avatar and their expectations and their demands and their hopes and their dreams and all the rest, all those are changing too. And so if we don't keep up with that, the digital native B2B brands that are starting out either as pure digital brands or even if they're omnichannel, they've started out as digital native brands, they will eat our lunch, won't they?
Absolutely. I definitely think there's a lot of good value into looking into in B2C. You have, even if you're a buyer and this is a work buying like purchase journey, you are still going to come with the mental model and expectations from your B2C experiences that you have outside of work. So if you are used to shopping online on sites as Amazon in your private life, you're going to go to work and want to do your purchases just as smoothly. And it's really going to create a lot of friction when it's not running that smoothly. And we really need to take this into consideration because it is a new type of buyer and they have different sets of expectations for their experience. And that is going to reflect on the brand. In like the highest impact is going to be what our customer relationships are going to look like. And we need to value those expectations and turn them into our favor.
And I think the other key point here is that the businesses that work in the B2B space and the verticals and categories that they work in, they are can differ wildly. And therefore, the product data that we have to present, the experiences we're trying to create, as you pointed out, in the B2C and D2C world, most websites look about the same. The reality, yes, there's 1,000 themes available for Shopify and BigCommerce and Magento and all the rest. But the reality is that the premise of the customer journey, the model of home, category, product, cart, checkout, like this flow, and also making sure that it's seamless regardless of where you enter that flow, and making sure that you have the right information presented to you at the right time in the product cards on a category page, for example, category descriptions, category banners, personalization tiles, etc. This is all, it's a pretty well-known design pattern, right? And we're not just talking the UX, UI design pattern, but even the tech stack is pretty well known. Mm-hmm. If you're a startup, you're probably going to go with Shopify, Klaviyo, Gorgeous, right? And you're probably going to use QuickBooks or Xero in the back end, right? And then as you grow a little bit older, okay, maybe now in the back end, I need a NetSuite instead of a Xero. And then on the front end, maybe I start out with a personalization app that plugs in the front end and maybe makes some generic rule-based product recommendations. Okay, cool. Then when I get a little bit bigger, then I'm going to introduce some dedicated search, merch, personalization technology like Nosto on the front end or something like that. Then when I get a little bit bigger, here's this, it's a stair-step pattern that we follow both as solution engineers like I am, but also from a UI UX perspective. Okay, we know, okay, at some point we're going to introduce loyalty. At some point we're going to introduce these other UX experiences and components that we're going to have to cater for. Okay, cool. We've got physical retail stores. Are we going to have a store locator? How are we going to introduce that into the buying journey? How are we going to introduce the UI UX components for click and collect, how we're going to show inventory on product. It's a stair step your way to success model that's pretty well defined in the B2C and D2C world, right? And that makes sense because the B2C and D2C world from a digital perspective is 10 to 15 years more mature than the B2B world, right? But also, not only is the B2B world less mature, but also every B2B business is so wildly different that a templated approach in the B2B world very rarely works. And even from a tech stack perspective and the experience layer, even that is almost impossible to template. This is where obviously bespoke design and UX experiences really pay massive dividends.
Yes, and it's exactly right. It's massive dividends. It's not just a marginal increase in ROI. You can tweak every aspect of your online store and increase your ROI for every design improvement you make to that buyer experience. So it actually has a very long-term impact on your e-commerce performance.
And how did you guys, first of all, I know obviously you were helping this platform vendor to create their template and their theme engine and some base themes that would work in as many use cases as possible. But how did you guys, first of all, even develop an interest in this? Because this is not what most creatives would consider sexy work, right? They want to go and they want to work for fucking Nike, they want to go and work for Chanel, they want to go and work for these super aspirational or super well-known household name brands that where the brand is like so intrinsic to the experience that it literally, when you say the word Nike or you say the word Chanel, it evokes some sort of feeling inside of you, whether positive or negative. How did you guys even turn your face to this at all? And then secondarily, how did you get deeply embedded enough in the B2B world to start understanding the nuances that exist there? Because it is very nuanced.
Hey team, I have a big favor to ask you. Please pause this episode and send the link of this episode to someone you know that you think would enjoy this content. Really appreciate you spreading the word. This is how we grow. We're not a Joe Rogan. We don't have big, massive advertising budgets, but we absolutely want to grow. We want to get the learnings from all of these episodes out to as wide of an audience as possible, and we need your help to do it. Thank you. And now back to your listening.
Yeah. I would say for me, as a UX designer, I love creating meaningful and create user value. So just realizing how there is a gap on the market and there is very little user value in the B2B e-commerce scene. Like for me, it's just noticing that gap and understanding the value that we can bring to the whole market. For me, that's motivation enough to know that we can create real impact. And it's a really exciting time to be just raising this topic and making it important because it has such an impact, not only on ROI, but the customer relationships. And it's really going to be a shift in the market, I see. And it's really exciting times to just be part of this.
Yep. For me, it's every day I learn something new about UX UI that blows my mind in the B2B e-commerce space. One time, Alexandra and I were designing the approval rules of flow for this B2B e-commerce template. And that was so complicated, trying to make it intuitive and it creates such a positive, engaging experience. And I used to be a e-commerce business owner. When I was building my own e-commerce business, I was so appreciative of all the e-commerce solutions that were out there that were supporting my journey. And I feel like I want to be part of that ecosystem and provide the value, which is what UX, UI, and B2B e-commerce does.
And I guess it's also, from a business perspective, for you guys, it's very blue ocean too.
Yes.
I'm sure you have competitors out there. I would assume you have some competitors out there. I'm sure you're not literally the only B2B design boutique in the world, but I've never heard of them. And look, I've had over 406 podcast episodes now, and I've been in this industry for 24 years. I've never run across another B2B focused creative boutique. I've never seen that. And like I said, I'm sure they exist, but I've never run across them. And so I would imagine that just as much as the blue ocean opportunity for the brands themselves exists, that means that it's very much a blue blue ocean opportunity for your business, meaning that, hey, look, if we're one of the first or only in our market, then instead of competing against tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of other creative agencies out there focusing on the D2Cs and B2C brands of the world, now instead we can set the ground rules. We can be a competitor of one, right? And you're just playing a completely different game. And as a result of that, it means that instead of having to try to differentiate within some very narrow confines of that B2C, D2C world, because it's increasingly hard to differentiate, right? Because when a brand goes out there and they're looking at setting up their Shopify store for the first time, they have like 1,000 themes that they can pick from. And most likely one of those themes will get them like 80 to 90% of the way to where they want to be. And so therefore, you're almost to a degree tinkering around the edges unless they want a completely bespoke theme from the ground up designed for them. But even in my experience, even for big brands, the desire and the appetite for that are like, it's probably represents less than 5% of the market, where they want a completely bespoke, from scratch theme for all devices, viewports, etc. That is increasingly rare, that you would have a complete blank slate design from the ground up. It's more, okay, let's take the base theme, let's take Cornerstone in the case of BigCommerce, and let's customize that for us, but we're starting from a base theme with all the base plumbing. In the B2B world, base themes are not really a thing. They're a thing in the sense that, okay, we've got a homepage you can use, we've got a category page you can use, maybe we've got the tabs within the My Account section that you can leverage or whatever it might be, but they, in many cases, are not good enough that you would look at that and go, that's a great starting point. That I'm guessing, and again, I'm probably putting words in your mouth, and I'd love your thoughts on this, there's more opportunity to start with a clean sheet in the B2B world because those businesses are so unique.
Yes, and it goes down to also how a template's code is written. So when we design a template, it's like you can see it like we're building a house. So the house has been already built for you, and it's been built whatever the basic standard design is. And then you decide that, no, I want to take this wall down because it makes more sense for me to have an open concept living room, kitchen space. Now, we all know that taking a wall down is not just a matter of taking a sledgehammer and you're done. You have to see where the wiring is. You have to shift maybe plumbing. Is it a load-bearing wall? And that's exactly the approach that you would have to take when you're trying to reconfigure an out-of-the-box template to your specifications. It's about figuring out what the internal plumbing is, the wiring is, moving things around, and that is resource intensive. That requires you to hire a web developer or engineer to sit there, read thousands of lines of code, understand how that code is structured, how they should rewrite that code, and it just becomes a pretty drawn out effort, and the end result is probably not what you were imagining or what you were expecting. So it is, of course, much easier to design something from scratch in the B2B e-commerce space.
And how do you deal with a scenario? Because you're a design boutique, you're not a dev house, you're not a dev shop, you're not going to be doing e-commerce implementations. You are basically the creative directors. You're taking ownership, or a level of ownership, over the creative design, look, feel, touch points. You're giving a lot of direction around that part of it. But from an engineering standpoint, all these B2B platforms operate very differently. They're on different languages. They have different workflow capabilities and all sorts of things. In the B2C and D2C world, most creative designers, in my experience, they work within an agency, meaning that they work directly with the tech leads. They work directly with the solution architects. They work directly with the technical people within the business, people like me and people that are developers. And they will usually, before a design will go to the customer, even a V1 design, even a proposed design, it will be run through somebody like me, or be run through like a tech lead to say, okay, is this doable? Is it practical to do these things? And then usually someone like me or a tech lead will come back and go, if you tweak this just slightly, this would require like half the effort that if we implemented exactly the way you've designed it in exactly the workflow that you've designed, then that is full custom. But if you tweak it just slightly, we can dramatically decrease the investment required to deliver this for the client. And so there is a little bit of back and forth between technical people and creatives before that first version gets presented to the merchant for them to consider and then offer their feedback and tweaks and revisions on. So because you're not working inside of a development house, because you're not working inside of a delivery agency and you are pure creatives, how does that then work? Would you typically, before you go to the brand with your designs, would you go to the vendor, for example, of the platform and say, is there a better way we could do these 5 things that we can maybe make some slight adjustments to the designs so that it's less of a heavy lift from a development perspective to implement? Who do you go through? Or does it go straight to the client first off?
So the process looks like first, what we'd want to do is we work with the client to identify their business goals or what their goals are with the project. And then we go into a research phase where we are looking at the qualitative as well as the quantitative data to understand where the opportunities for improvement lie. Then the next step is to identify these opportunities of improvement and then figure out the solution. So the solutions will be based on best practices and our own experience and research. We then go into the designing phase where we will make our suggested designs according to our research. And that's when we share these designs with all the various stakeholders. So we will share them with the engineering team, and they will be the first ones to say, no, this is not possible, this is not possible. And if they give us that feedback, we redo the designs according to what we learned from them. We also share it with the other teams like marketing, operations, leadership teams, and everyone to get their feedback on what they're looking for, what their expectations are. After everyone has contributed their feedback and has given the approval on the designs, that's when we go into implementation. And that's when we work with the engineers, the developers to write the code of these designs. And there are lots of situations where we're writing the code and we realize it's not working. So then we would go back to the drawing board, redo the design, change it a bit, get some more feedback if required, and then update the designs. So it's a process with the whole team. We both have considerable experience collaborating with engineers, with marketing teams, with leadership teams. And we know how to make sure everyone's feedback is represented, everyone's business goals are represented.
And how often are you called in after the fact? Meaning they've built the website and someone comes into the business and realizes, geez, this is horrific. Maybe the functionality is great, but this looks like a dog's breakfast. We cannot carry on like this. We need to now basically put lipstick on a pig, right? Because I assume that it would be far better. For example, when I'm consulting to my clients, UX, UIs, honestly, it's quite a bit of an afterthought. It just is, and it still is. It may not always be that way, but in the B2B world, it still is. I would say that when I'm doing my scoping, when I'm doing my solutioning, when I'm doing the search and select for platform and for implementation partner, etc., on behalf of my clients and working collaboratively with them, in a perfect world, you guys would be brought in as part of the solutioning and search and select phase, because it's a heck of a lot easier to know, sure, functionally I might know what they expect, and therefore I'm going to help them pick a platform based on the 80-20 rule. Can the platform do at least 80% of what you require from a capability and functional perspective out of the box without customization? Because the last thing we want to do is launch with a mountain of tech debt out of the gate, right? We want to minimize that. So let's try to pick a platform that can do like 80% of what you need out of the box, and then we customize from there. The last 10 or 20% we customize, right? But even within that context, it would still be better if we were starting to marry the UX and UI experience up with the functional requirements before we ever select platform, before we ever select partner. It feels like that should be much earlier in the process, because I know that when I was building agencies, when I was working inside agencies, we didn't just do technical discovery, we did creative discovery too. And our creative designers would come in and they would run that portion of the discovery. They would be talking through the look, the feel, the requirements from the marketing team and the sales teams, etc. And we would do discovery together. I would lead the technical discovery. They would lead the creative discovery. And so therefore, we would put our heads together after discovery completes, after a couple of days or whatever it is. We'd put our heads together and we'd say, okay, what's the best way to approach this? And what's the best platform that can give them as close to what they want without recreating the world and hitting their budget and their timeline expectations as well. So you got to take all those things into account. But it feels like in the B2B world, this is still anathema to the discovery process.
Yes. And I think another part of this process that gets overlooked is that how your internal team experiences the tools that you're using for your e-commerce solution. So we have in-house daily like merchandising teams or marketing teams. These are daily users. And we also have to make sure that the solutions that we pick have good UX UI for our own users, not just the e-commerce store we're building for our buyers.
Yeah, that's a key one, right? Because oftentimes this now becomes the digital sales tooling for field sales. It becomes the digital sales tooling for customer service teams. Because without a great e-commerce platform on the front end, most of these people live in an ERP. Without an e-commerce function, without an e-commerce capability in the business and being able to do customer masquerading and create quotes for them and do all those things in the e-commerce platform, those get created either in an ERP or a CRM or some other back office system. And in many cases, the business finds we don't actually want our salespeople living in an ERP. Yeah. We don't actually want our customer service people living in an ERP. And so this becomes the primary interface. Once it's implemented, it becomes the primary platform that they live in to do their day-to-day job. And as a result of that, you have to get them on the bus too, because internal people can derail a project just as fast as any external customer can. So the reality is you've got to start with an adoption plan internally just as much as externally. And that starts with a user experience that's so seamless, so straightforward, so easy that it becomes a no-brainer. That's the platform that they want to use. And they don't want to live in an ERP anymore. They don't want to live in a CRM anymore. They don't want to live in a WMS anymore. They want to live in the commerce platform because it allows them to do their jobs faster and easier, right?
Exactly. And there are opportunities to design a front-end application for your sales teams, for your customer service teams, so that when a buyer wants to negotiate a quote, then you have on the other end your internal people having that conversation with the buyer through a common application. So there are opportunities for UX UI for internal operations as well.
Most dedicated B2B platforms have that in the back end. They have that capability already. You don't need to build a custom application. They've got it in the back end. It's just that some B2B e-commerce platforms are more flexible in the UI, UX that you can cram the back end for those business users. Some are less flexible, some are more flexible. Some have massive flexibility on the front end and very little flexibility on the back end. And so this is where that tension comes in, right? Because at the end of the day, if our internal people do not adopt these platforms, they can't help our customers adopt these platforms. And we want our salespeople going and sitting side by side with their customers and walking through the first 1, 2, 3 orders with them and make sure that it's seamless and make sure it's easy and make sure that they actually want to use those technologies, even if they don't complete the transaction. We want them using it for as many services as possible so that we can offload those off of our customer service and success teams, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so who would typically be the buyer inside of a B2B organization that would engage you? Is it a sales lead? Is it a customer service lead? I'm assuming it's pretty rarely a marketing lead. Who is it? Because I know that who I engage with is typically head of business systems, head of IT, head of sales. It's definitely not a marketer. It's everything but a marketer who would usually engage my services. So I'm assuming it's a little bit similar for you guys. And do you find that for most of these B2B brands, marketing is heavily underserved in the business to begin with? And especially when it comes to UI, UX, they're very rarely consulted, even if they have a marketing person, right?
Yes, essentially, we, just like in anything in the B2B world, there is no typical buyer. We've got people, whoever has that awareness, those are the people that would be interested to explore this topic further. And that could include an operations, head of operations, COO. That could include there's a chief digital officer role that we see. It's new, it's coming up in B2B e-commerce. It's already common in B2C. We've got marketers who are tasked, who own the e-commerce store. So that would be like maybe CMO or head of marketing level. So it's very rare to see an e-commerce manager, a B2B e-commerce manager reach out about this value proposition.
Bloody rare, isn't it?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that role doesn't even exist in the business until they've got an e-commerce website, and then maybe they think about getting an e-com manager.
Yeah. And then we have some roles like special projects, strategy. Those are the guys that normally think about these things. But it has to do with the overall company strategy. Is the e-commerce part, the e-commerce service, something that they're taking seriously as a way to expand, as a way to grow sales? Or is it something that's just out there that they just put out there because that's supposed to be the thing to do, digital transformation? So it really depends on the way the company is viewing their e-commerce store.
And are you seeing that more B2B brands now, since you guys have started, I know you're still a relatively young business, but are you finding now that you're out there actively in the market, promoting your services and trying to win business and create a pipeline and create personal brands and all that sort of stuff, are you finding that this is increasingly getting attention within these B2B brands? You're obviously helping to illuminate this problem and this challenge within these brands, but are you getting a warmer reception now than perhaps you did when you started your business or when you started looking at establishing this business? Is it becoming more of a thing now in the B2B world?
I think there's still, it's still growing. So it's not quite there yet. So we are getting people who are reading up the message, who are trying to learn about the message, but they may not feel that sense of urgency yet to act on the message, which is fine. It takes time. It's a very complicated topic, and the value proposition is a little complex if you don't have that technology experience. But yeah, it is still developing.
Yeah, I also feel like you can see the difference in the different services that are being provided, and you can see all the data coming through different surveys. UX, UI is definitely more mentioned, and you get a lot of statistics. For example, like 2025, 80% of B2B sales are going to be on digital channels. And I think this type of messaging is also going to create more of an urgency and understanding that e-commerce is probably the future of B2B sales in general, and it's also going to make the topic way more relevant, and it's really exciting to be here in the growth of the topic and be one of the pioneers in it, and it's very exciting.
Love it. And are you guys going to any B2B conferences? I'm going to be at B2B Online Florida at the end of the year in November. I'm going to be the day one chair. Are you guys starting to think about becoming more involved in the B2B commerce community full stop, so that you can, and even for me, oftentimes people go, why do I need a consultant? I've got an agency. I don't think I need a consultant. And so helping people understand what the role of a consultant is and can be and how it can help them massively move the needle in their business. Just because I don't have a dev team sitting behind me that I need to feed, that's actually a benefit, because it makes me much more independent. I'm not trying to sell you something just so I can sell development in the back end. Consulting is all I do. And so therefore it allows me a level of independence around platform recommendations and experience recommendations that agencies don't always have. I know, because I've built agencies. So for you guys, are you looking at ways of becoming more visible in the B2B community and going to trade shows of specific categories and verticals, maybe working with the National Association of Manufacturers and Wholesalers, those types of things? It feels there's some natural synergies between you and some other B2B players in the space, and of course podcasts like this, etc., that have a B2B focus. Is that kind of how you're working out your go-to-market, is to become more visible in all these spaces?
And this Thursday, we're going to attend the e-commerce industry awards, and we're definitely looking into more conferences to join and just hear of the topic and how the industry is responding to all of this, and super excited to just hear more of the messaging and put ourselves out there more and get to know the people who are active in B2B e-commerce and spread our messaging.
To walk the walk. We are talking about building relationships. That is the essence, trusting relationships of a B2B relationship. So that is what we want to do. We want to go out there, meet people who are working in these industries, and introduce ourselves and our topic to them directly. So whereas the B2B e-commerce events, those are great industry events to build the expertise or the awareness on the topics, it's also very important for us to go directly to the manufacturing and distribution events and start talking to people there, just introducing the topics. It's not like we're trying to go to these events and sell our services on the floor of an expo, but I think it's really important to start building that relationship and just show our faces at these events.
Love it. And if you're not already a member of the B2B b2b.org. You should definitely look into that. Brett and Justin King and Chris over in the UK chapter doing some amazing things. And we've, of course, just had our awards, and the awards are going to be announced this week for the B2B EA Awards. So, yeah, that's a great place to start as well and get plugged into the ecosystem. Listen, ladies, this has been a fantastic chat. An hour is absolutely blown by. You're clearly very switched on. You clearly saw a market opportunity. You clearly married up your skill set with that marketing opportunity and said, look, this is a blue ocean space that kind of no one else has had the gumption to take on and own. So instead, we're going to do it, and we're going to own it. And I think that's really cool. I think our industry needs more of that. I think our industry needs more people like you to be evangelists for really great UX, UI experiences for B2B buyers and sellers for that matter. So congratulations, kudos to you, and I wish you guys every success, and I have no doubt that you guys will be very successful doing what you're doing if you stay the course. Congratulations to you. Now, as we come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you, let you ask me one question. Any question you like, can be personal or professional. And you guys, because both of you joined, you get a double header. So you both get to ask your own individual question of me instead of one joint question. So, Saumya and Alexandra, what is your question for me today?
What is the most interesting or like maybe shocking sort of thing you've seen in the B2B e-commerce space?
Look, I'll tell you what continues to shock me. B2B brands that offer no e-commerce experience at all, like none. They've got like a brochure website with a homepage and that's it. Maybe a homepage and a contact us form. That still blows my mind. And one of the reasons, there's actually a very big reason that blows my mind over and above offering a crappy experience to the customer. It's more that B2B brands are starting to realize that SEO matters and having your catalog exposed to Google matters. Going back to that statistic of the buyer now being a millennial, they're not starting their supplier search in the yellow pages. They're not starting their supplier search in some sort of Slack channel, or they're starting their supplier search in Google just like they are in their personal life. So if they want to buy widget X, they're going to type manufacturer of widget X, or distributor of widget X, or wholesaler of widget X, or supplier of widget X into Google, right? That's where they're starting their supplier search. And so I think that this idea of closed catalogs in the B2B world, authentication only access, even if they have a website, oftentimes it's authenticated access only. You can't even see the products that they carry until you authenticate and log in. This still, it shouldn't shock me because it's the default in the B2B world, but it still surprises me because I think that COVID helped these B2B brands get religion that they needed digital routes to market. But to your point, they oftentimes don't actually know what that means because they've never, ever considered it before and what that means to their business, right? It still shocks me. It shouldn't, but it does.
So according to you, what is the most trending topics right now in B2B e-commerce?
Look, I think that AI is a hot topic, but it gets a lot of airtime and it gets a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And I think AI is amazing in terms of demand planning and some of the other operational function inside these B2B businesses, procurement, things like that. I think AI is really powerful in these scenarios, but I think that most B2B brands need to crawl, walk, run, and they want to jump straight to the AI transformation. And you don't even sell online yet. Let's get the basics. Let's establish a catalog that your customers can log in. They can see their prices. They can see their catalog. They can make a purchase. They can place quote requests. Let's just start with the simplest of capabilities. Let's get it adopted internally and by your customers as much as possible. Let's make sure that it's really tailored for those buyers and make sure that it's what they actually want from you. And let's start there. Let's start with the system integration that needs to happen to make that possible. Let's start there. And then maybe in 6, 12, 18, 24 months, then maybe let's start thinking about this cool AI shit. Because oftentimes the inquiries I get is, how can we use AI in our business? And I say, sure, but you're most likely going to get your AI through your platform vendors. So your technology vendors are already thinking about how to get AI into their ERP. They're already thinking about how to get AI into their PIM and Gen AI into the PIM so it can look at an image and auto add attributes and scan PDFs and pull out attributes and automatically load it. Like all your vendors that is what is keeping them up at night already, is AI. So you probably, as a B2B brand, don't really need to think too hard about AI yourself, because your vendors are all doing that the heavy lifting for you. You're not going to need to go and consume AWS AI and custom integrate that into your customer experience. You're just not going to need to do that. So how about we do the basics first, and let's do an MVP build and get you up and running and learn. So test, learn, build, test, learn, iterate, build, test, learn, iterate. It just feels like a lot of these brands, but India, for example, historically, they have one of the highest mobile adoption rates in the world because a lot of people, the first computer that they had at home was their mobile device. So they went from having no computer at all to they skipped desktop, they skipped the laptop, and they went straight to the mobile device. And it feels like a lot of these B2B brands are trying to do that. They're trying to skip all the foundational steps and technology that they really need to have, and they want to jump straight to the good stuff. And there's actually a lot of work we need to do to get to the good stuff first.
Yeah.
That's a really good.
Listen, guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. I learned a ton from you guys. Super proud of what you guys are doing and helping the industry, and I wish you guys all the best. Can't wait to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been really fun.
Thank you.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.